I would like to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people who are the traditional owners of the land that I'm standing on, that is Parkville, Melbourne. I would like to pay respects to the elders, both past and present, of the Kulin Nation and extend respect to other Indigenous present. Good morning. My name is Dr. Marion Mahat, and I am a Senior Research Fellow in the Learning Environments Applied Research Network at the University of Melbourne. My presentation today is going to focus on findings from the Innovative Learning Environment and Teacher Change project and the implications for the future. Before I do that, a little bit about myself. I was born and bred in Singapore and studied in square classrooms with square tables in what could be called a vertical school throughout my primary and secondary school years. I was a partial straight A student, engaged and diligent in my studies, and performed well throughout. Fast forward many years later, when my firstborn reached school age, I went around the northern suburbs of Melbourne to explore the neighborhood primary schools, as you do being a parent. One school stood out. It had an innovative learning environment, a result of the Building the Education Revolution, an Australian government program designed to provide new and refurbished infrastructure to all eligible Australian schools. The primary school was characterized by large open space learning areas, a signature feature of the 21st century school environment, said the principal. An open plan school environment helps students and teachers collaborate, he explained. I was not convinced as I tried to get myself heard over the chatter of other parents and children in the large learning space. How can my child learn and focus in such a disruptive environment? Needless to say, my firstborn ended up going to a school with traditional classrooms. This one was characterized by round desks to encourage collaboration and square rooms to minimize disruption. The school was small, and although bursting around the seams, I took comfort in knowing that my child would be able to learn in the same type of traditional school environment I grew up in. So this is my context when I started as a research manager in a large Australian Research Council linkage project on innovative learning environment and teacher change. The project is a $2 million linkage project funded for 4 years from 2016 to 2019. It brings together the expertise of leading researchers in education and architecture to respond to a key research question. Can altering teacher mindframes unlock the potential of innovative learning environments? ILETC was focused on supporting teachers' transition from traditional spaces to more innovative learning spaces. Its broad aim was to collate good practices, develop strategies and tools and methods for their effective dissemination. The project is part of the Learning Environments Applied Research Network, or LEARN. LEARN is a community of scholars from the faculties of education, architecture, and medicine who collaborate to investigate the impact of learning spaces in different contexts. The project team consists of 8 chief investigators in Melbourne and Monash, a dedicated project manager and research manager, 7 PhD students in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, New Zealand, and Texas, 2 research fellows in Auckland and Brisbane, and 4 research assistants. Most impressively, it had 17 partners in Australia, New Zealand, Sweden, and the United States, consisting of 5 educational jurisdictions in Canberra, New South Wales, Queensland, Catholic Education of Parramatta, and the Ministry of Education in New Zealand, schools in Adelaide, Queensland, and Victoria, industry partners such as Hayball Architects, DLR, Steelcase, Acathon, Museum, Powerhouse, Telstra, and Microsoft, who are all interested in supporting teachers use space as a pedagogical tool. Findings from the project came from many sources, including 7 PhD projects, 7 international conferences in Australia, Europe, and North America, 3 industry think tank meetings, multiple workshops across Australia and New Zealand, and more than 30 case studies involving schools, museums, and architects. Today, I'm going to focus on 4 key findings centered around design, pedagogy, successful transition, and professional learning. The first is focused on the design of school learning environments. In the context of school learning, when we think of traditional classrooms, we think of square desks within 4 walls. We think of a learning space in which the teacher provides instruction to students and communication between and among teacher and student is face-to-face. It is very teacher-centric and teacher-led. Open space was an experimental school design where the physical walls separating classrooms were removed to promote movement across class areas by teachers. Started in the 1960s, the idea of the open classroom was that a large group of students of varying skill levels would be in a single large classroom with several teachers overseeing them. Rather than having one teacher lecture to the entire group at once, students are typically divided into different groups for each subject according to their skill level for that subject. The students then work in small groups to achieve the assigned goal. Innovative learning environments, on the other hand, are often centered around a student where a lot of the teaching and learning occurs. And these student bases provide access to a variety of other learning spaces. These innovative spaces are characterized by flexibility. That is, the learning environment helps students be active, responsible participants in their own learning and with their own pace of learning, placing the teacher as the facilitator of learning. They are multimodal, or having the ability to accommodate different teaching and pedagogical practices. They provide a seamless integration with outdoor spaces that can serve as extensions of the indoor learning environment. It has seating and furniture that is modular and flexible, which allows for a variety of teaching and learning modes. The learning environment is technologically infused. They provide sightlines, visibility, and transparency to ensure maximum learning opportunities. An innovative space has dynamic lighting, which can be optimized for many learning activities, and considers the efficacy of acoustics in its design through innovative use of panels, fabric, materials, and surfaces. But an innovative learning environment is more than just innovative designs. An innovative learning environment should also incorporate innovative teaching and learning practices. A design may be deemed innovative, but it only becomes an innovative learning environment once teachers and students teach and learn innovatively within them. The second finding relates to pedagogy. We asked principals in Australian and New Zealand schools of their perceptions of teaching and learning happening in these spaces. More than 800 principals responded. Over a range of types of spaces from type A to type E, we found that schools with a higher prevalence of more flexible learning spaces, that is types D and E, assess student deep learning and teacher mindframes higher than those in more traditional spaces. If we explore this further, we also found that in traditional spaces where teachers use more collaborative and team teaching pedagogies, student deep learning and teacher mindframes were higher than those in traditional spaces using teacher-centered pedagogies. Despite this finding, it is interesting to note that 3/4 of schools in Australia and New Zealand are still using traditional classrooms and pedagogies. The third finding relates to characteristics of successful transition. We found that there is a common pathway that teachers follow as they transit into an innovative learning environment. This pathway consists of a large variety of change strategies that facilitate teachers' transition into these spaces. Tangible spatial learning tools can be developed that teachers use to turn strategies into actions. The spatial transition pathway can be illustrated pictorially. This illustration summarizes the commonalities among teachers' multiple approaches to transition into an innovative learning environment. While there exists a logical, reasonably common pathway that teachers follow as they transition into an innovative learning environment, this pathway is highly individualized both at the school and teacher levels. The reality is that each school and teacher experience unique challenges during this transition. Spatial strategies and tools can be developed to support schools and teachers navigate the transition process. The final finding relates to professional learning. We surveyed teachers globally and received more than 1,000 responses in more than 15 countries. Teachers identified 14 transition themes that they needed professional learning in. These included developing curriculum specific to these spaces, participating in the design of the new spaces, being able to evaluate the impact of these spaces on students' learning experiences, developing an appropriate pedagogy for these spaces, having a school organizational structure that supports the use of these spaces, understanding how technology might enhance the use of space, and developing collaborative practices in these spaces. It is interesting to note that up to 40% of teachers, almost half of teachers, have had some or no help in these areas. Of note are evaluation practices, developing spatial competencies, and improving both students' and teachers' experiences in these spaces. Most teachers confirm that it takes them up to 6 months to feel comfortable teaching in these innovative spaces. In summary, these are the 4 key findings. Given evidence now exists that innovative learning environments are successful in practice, what are some of the implications? Looking forward, the design and build of school learning environment is no longer open. It should emphasize flexibility. In particular, the COVID-19 pandemic has also shown that a hybrid learning model that enables schools to provide the right mix of all learning possibilities in blended online and offline environment is critical. Reconceiving the physical learning environment to accommodate new ways of learning is no longer optional, but becomes a necessity going forward. Secondly, the design and build of school learning environments can no longer just rely on engagement between architects and school leadership team. There's a need for a systematic co-design process with all stakeholders, including teachers, students, and parents. Co-design is a highly facilitated team-based process in which all stakeholders work together in defined roles to design an educational innovation for addressing a concrete educational need. Knowing what we already know, how then can we harness the knowledge from school, industry, and policy partners to design spaces whose primary function is to enable all students to actively engage in learning? Firstly, research into learning environments should be multidisciplinary, leveraging evidence from universities, schools, industry, and policy so that they can have a broader impact on student learning. Secondly, professional learning should harness the collective knowledge of universities, schools, industry, and policy so that we can better support teachers' development of special competencies. In particular, reskilling and upskilling the workforce of the present becomes increasingly critical. Micro-credentials, small courses that focus on a particular area of study is one way forward. Schools need to take an active role to support their teachers in expanding knowledge and capability in the face of rapid change. Educators need to be mobilized by the career benefits of taking a proactive approach to their own ongoing learning, and governments need to create the enabling conditions swiftly and creatively to assist these efforts. I would like to conclude this presentation with this quote. There are 2 types of schools, those that prepare kids for the future and those that allow adults to live comfortably in the past. Which are we? Thank you.